Welcome to Future Focus. On this show, we provide insights, strategies, and resources to support neurodiverse individuals in planning for their future. I'm your host, Dr. Janae Duclos, and together we'll explore the unique challenges and opportunities that individuals with disabilities face in various stages of life. Future Focus is brought to you by C3 for Me. For more information to help you or a loved one in planning for the future, visit c3forme.com. This week on Future Focus, we interview with Dr. Emily Tarconish. Dr. Tarconish teaches at the University of Illinois' College of Education in the Special Education Department. Listen in to hear how a traumatic brain injury shaped her mission for disability advocacy. Welcome to C3 for Me special interview series, where we believe everyone deserves a life of self-determination and success. Our guest today is Dr. Emily Tarconish, a teaching assistant, professor of special education at the University of Illinois. At the age of 15, Dr. Tarconish was involved in a severe car crash, one that would leave her in a coma for 9 days after the accident and cause her to experience a severe traumatic brain injury. We are excited to have Dr. Tarconish with us today as our guest and learn more about her experience and how she's overcome and transitioned successfully into adulthood. Welcome, Dr. Tarconish.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right in. I mean, there's so much to explore and discuss. I know that you have key highlights and insights for us today, so I'm really excited to have you on. And again, thank you for your time. So the first question that I have for you, Dr. Tarconish, is what led you to the field of education, but particularly to become a professor in the College of Education?
Absolutely. So before my injury, I grew up as a neurotypical and able-bodied individual. And my parents were both teachers, so I wanted to be like my mom. I wanted to be an English teacher. So, I always thought I would want to be an English teacher. And then my accident happened when I was 15. And I very quickly learned about how inaccessible a lot of our components of our education system are. Mm-hmm. And that quickly pivoted my interest to wanting to work in the special ed system, and particularly with students with disabilities. But then when I went to college, I was still pretty early in my recovery, and I had some, relatively significant cognitive impairments. And so that kind of steered what I was able to major in. I mean, I honestly didn't get any supports in college because like most students with disabilities, I didn't know disability services existed. And I didn't know accommodations in college were a thing. Yes. So I kind of the classes that I did best in happened to be English classes as well. So I majored in English in college. But then when I graduated and I was, thinking about getting my teacher licensure as an English teacher, I thought, I reflected on my own experiences, kind of not really having direction with my career development. Mm-hmm. And so I got a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling in a program that specifically focused on transition services related to vocational rehabilitation. So exactly what I wish I had. I became a vocational rehabilitation counselor after I got my master's degree, which basically meant I provided career development services to high school and eventually college students with disabilities to really help them think about what are my strengths and how am I going to use those to find solutions to barriers that are in my life. And then when I practiced as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for 3 years, and most of my caseload was split between high school students with disabilities and college students with disabilities. And I was seeing a huge gap. Yes. The high school students who wanted to transition into the workforce, they did that pretty okay. They found jobs that were meaningful to them. But the students I found struggling were the students who were transitioning from high school to college. So many of them felt that they weren't college ready. They didn't have the executive functioning skills. They didn't know what to study. They didn't know what to major in. They didn't know how to have a roommate. All those independent living skills.
All under the umbrella of self-determination.
Yeah. Exactly. All that stuff that students are kind of just expected to figure out on their own. particularly if they don't get life skills, instruction in high school. I saw a lot of students struggling with that. And so as a practitioner, I turned to the research literature to find answers, and I found it was pretty sparse. Again, this was about 15 years ago. But, I felt frustrated that as somebody who was working with high school and college students with disabilities, that I didn't have research guiding best practices, that I didn't have, a literature to turn to give me options for how to, increase student success. Yeah. And so after that, I learned about a PhD program, and I learned that, that's what a PhD is. Sure, you're a content expert, but you really learn how to produce research literature. And because I felt that there was a dearth of research supporting the students, guiding me to support the students that I wanted to guide, I decided to become a professor to do that research myself.
And here you are today. So thank you for definitely taking us through your transition from as an undergraduate and moving forward into the workforce and finding or filling that void or that gap, right? You saw a need through your own lived experiences and personal experiences, and you sought out to do something about it and address it. And you're making a difference and impact every day. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned previously having a lack of literature, a body of literature, substantial literature to refer to or fall back on as a practitioner, right? To be able to better support the students in which you were serving at the time. I myself have found, being a recent graduate PhD student, that there is still a gap of existing literature when it comes to predictors of positive post-school outcomes. So yes, it's limited. I will say that. So yes, we do have some existing, but it's still limited. The field is still emerging. Trends are still emerging, where we're finding what works and what works best for students, youth, and young adults with disabilities. So I thank you for noting that and highlighting that there's still a need to further our research, which gives us significance, right? Significance to what we do every day. And so this leads me to my next question, actually. You've taken us through the transition, again, through how you even got into the field of education, and particularly now serving as a professor in academia. But I would be interested to know how being a neurodivergent individual, right, having a disability, how has that influenced your approach to teaching, as well as the way in which you educate others as it relates to disabilities?
Absolutely. I really think the answer is it goes hand in hand. The way I learn and the barriers that I faced as a neurodivergent student or a neurodiverse individual, I really expect that many of my students are going to be in the same boat. And particularly now that I'm in the college realm, I recognize that less than 30% of students with disabilities self-disclose and get formal accommodations. That's a really small number, especially considering close to 95% of students with disabilities get supports in K-12 education. So what a huge gap.
What's happening, right? What's happening from high school to college, to continued education?
Exactly. So I recognize there are many students with disabilities in every classroom I teach in on a college campus who have disabilities and who aren't disclosing and who likely aren't relying on the supports that they've relied on for, 12, 13 years
of their life.
Exactly. Yeah. And so because of that, and again, a lot of this reflects on my experience being a disabled college student who also didn't have accommodations. So I really lean heavily on universal design for instruction and learning. And universal design for instruction and learning, or UDIL, is the notion that education is built for this mythical average student who really doesn't exist. There's no middle student in everything. No. So these practices that we often put in place that we expect students to all learn in a similar way or kind of navigate or get towards the mean doesn't really work. So what UDIL says is, hey, when you're designing a curriculum, step back and think every single learning objective you have, how many pathways are you going to have to meet it? And what barriers might be in place, or what abilities are you implicitly requiring students to have to meet these objectives? And if they're not written into the objectives, then you need to reconsider. For instance, if I want to teach students about disability law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I say, okay, your Your learning objective is to understand the purpose of the act, the history of the act, and some of the key players in establishing it. And then I say to students, we're going to take a test to do that. Well, I'm requiring them to have that content, but I'm also requiring them to be able to remember it, be able to use their processing speed, be able to pay attention to the test.
So many different elements.
So many cognitive abilities are implicit in having a test. Similarly, if I say, write a paper about it, if I don't teach those students how to write a paper, I'm assuming everybody's on an even playing field, which is certainly not the case. And so when I design my courses, I say, okay, here are my learning objectives. I specify the learning objectives, and then I say, okay, well, how can I be as flexible as possible? For instance, if I need somebody to get that content about the Americans with Disabilities Act, well, can they do it via test? Sure. Can they do it writing a paper? Probably. Can they do it coming into my office and having a conversation with me? Can they do it via a presentation, via a group project? How can I create as many avenues as possible for them to achieve those objectives while not burdening them with using other abilities that may not be as, as developed for students? And I do that with participation as well. It drives me bonkers that, some professors or teachers or people say, oh, well, you have to answer out loud 3 times in my class. Yeah. That's not possible for everyone. Not only are many students have disabilities that would make that really challenging, but some people are just shy. And why do we want our learners to be uncomfortable? So I say, okay, you have to participate once or twice in today's class. You can raise your hand. You can shoot me an email. I have an open chat. It's an anonymous chat. Everybody in the class has the link. They can type a question. I know who types it, but nobody else does. So again, creating different options for folks to get involved in education and not burdening them with the way that they're required to do that. If we want students to get information, think about it and apply it, there are many different pathways to do that. And so I do a lot of that in my teaching.
Absolutely. And so as you were expressing and sharing some of your instructional strategies and approaches, right? Systemically, how you approach tailoring your instruction to the needs of your students. I mean, your enthusiasm just oozed, and so I was able to, I thought about the core pillars or the core elements of UDIL, right? Having access, engagement, how the students able to engage in multiple ways with the content, right? To synthesize and be able to apply the information. And then how are they representing or demonstrating their understanding to you, right? To be able to assess the mastery of the content or skill or topic. Amazing. I would love to enroll in and be in one of your courses, okay?
Well, that's kind of you.
Sounds like my type of teaching. Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about how you got to, your existing, I don't want to say necessarily a title, but your existing position, right, in higher ed. We also spoke a little bit about your unique approaches, your teaching approaches, right, to being able to address your students as well as assess them and ensure that they're understanding and mastering the content.
Sure.
What I would love to delve into next is the research aspect of higher ed and in your position, right? Your current duties in your role as a assistant professor. You hinted on this previously, and yes, we see again an emerging of more literature, right? As we have additional legislation that's enacted. So, for example, in Florida, we actually just had a rule revision for the statute for transition planning in 2021. So as we're seeing more people are becoming aware, we're analyzing the post-school outcomes and really looking, analyzing the data of how many of these students are exiting and actually moving on to continued education, gaining some type of meaningful employment, or just gaining or attaining a sense of independence, right? We're seeing a need for additional research, literature, and findings to be shared on how we can address or solve this problem of ineffective transition planning practice. So from your avenue, your perspective, I would love to know how have you used research to remove some of these existing barriers, as well as what are you doing currently to become allies or advocate for individuals with disabilities?
Absolutely. Well, my approach to research is absolutely participatory. I think in doing research, there's automatically a power hierarchy, right? You have the researcher and the participant. You have and the researcher is typically somebody without it
Perceived.
exactly perceived power,
Yeah.
and that I think that's going to hinder the authentic ways that participants can participate in that research. So when I do research, I think about the populations with whom I want to work with, and I have my ideas about the area. But I sit down with those communities and say, hey, look, here's what I'm thinking of developing a research study around. Is that meaningful to you? Would you take it in a different direction? How would you want to participate in that study? How do you think your community would want to participate? One example is I'm working with a community group of people with disabilities right now who for a while were saying, hey, look, businesses are inaccessible. They claim to be ADA accessible, but the ADA covers this much of accessibility. And in, their lives, they described all these areas that weren't met by the ADA standards for accessibility practice. And so I sat down with those people for 2 years in focus groups to help them really consider what does accessibility mean and how can we communicate this information effectively to community members and to businesses. So from that, we developed an accessible business evaluation. And then I said to the participants, I took it right back to them and I said, hey, does this encompass all the ideas you talked about? Member checking is a huge piece of qualitative research. I think especially when you're working with marginalized populations who are used to not having a voice or used to having their voices muted, again, in that power hierarchy, it is so critical to make sure you're authentically and accurately representing the needs of disabled folks. And so after they said, yep, this looks accurate and good to us, I said, okay, how should we measure it? What's the purpose of all this? And, again, we had more focus groups because I also think time limits in themselves kind of are a piece of academic ableism. As a disabled person myself, I'm likely not going to answer all questions asked in a meeting in that 1 hour period. I'm going to need some days and some time to think about it. So I continued to meet with these members. And what they were saying is, community accessibility, it's about using a business, but it really is about a sense of belonging. If a community is not accessible to me, I feel like I don't belong. I feel like I'm othered or like an outsider. And with that, we decided to build a study that we're going to assess how disabled folks using our evaluation, and the results will be displayed on a tourism website where you can search for, let's say, a Mexican restaurant that has wheelchair entrance at the front of the building, low lighting, and non-sticky tables, and is disability dog friendly. They're not going to ask questions about your
whatever you need access to. It's going to be
check out those and populate it. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask people who use this directory to identify accessible businesses how it affects their sense of community belonging. And again, that's not something
going to be very powerful.
I wouldn't have come up with that research goal on my own, but working with the community to say, what should we study? What's meaningful to you? And how can I use my abilities as a researcher to, produce meaningful results for the community? And I mean, community of people with disabilities. And I think the question was two things. One, how do you do research? And one, how do you serve as an advocate?
Yes.
The same. Yes. I think the type of research I want to do is not only participatory, but
very authentic. Yes.
I frame it from theoretical backgrounds that, look at the world critically. Critical disability theory, disability theory and critical race theory, disability justice, critical disability studies. These are all frameworks that really point out how the world was built by able-bodied people for able-bodied people.
Correct. And how for that medium that you talk about. Right?
Exactly. How research isn't just supposed to say cause and effect, but also why are these power structures in place and what are their implications and how are the lived experiences of disabled folks affected by them? So I really think research and activism or research and advocacy really go together, particularly when your work involves disability justice.
You brought up a good point, Emily, about having those voices not only present, but making sure that they are reflective in your findings and inform next steps, right? You're actually utilizing their feedback. You mentioned your process with some of your sessions, your interviewing sessions that you conducted was cyclical. It wasn't stagnated, right? You didn't just have one specific session with these individuals. You allowed time, you were flexible, and this was on an ongoing basis, participatory, where they were able to share information You develop next steps based on the information that they share, but then you even went back to member check, like you said, to ensure accuracy of their work. Were you reflecting accurately or portraying accurately what their thoughts, their feelings, their perceptions? And I think that's very important for us not to skew or misconstrue information that's shared by vulnerable populations, at-risk populations, or subgroups of individuals with disabilities.
Absolutely. And I recognize that, as a disabled researcher, I do have an EMIC or inside perspective, but I'm one disabled person with one disability. It is not my job to speak for any other disabled person or community. And so that's why I think it's so critical for us to really make sure we're not analyzing, make sure we're checking our biases as we're analyzing qualitative data, which is why I think it's so important to put in credibility and trustworthiness measures when conducting these studies.
I'm smiling as you're sharing because, you're doing some great work, some really good work on reflective or on behalf of a community that is sometimes stifled, not seen and not heard. So you're doing something amazing to definitely benefit the greater good and move society forward. So
thank you.
So I have a question for you, because we may have some listeners and viewers that we know how you got here, but maybe interested in joining your member of allies or becoming an advocate. They may have an inclination of wanting to transition to higher ed. Maybe that's their aspiration one day.
Sure.
We have some listeners that will be on that possibly have disabilities, or we have advocates of those individuals. Maybe they have family members, caregivers, right? What advice would you give to other neurodiverse individuals who may be interested in pursuing a career in academia?
Absolutely. So when we think about folks with disabilities moving into higher education, college, graduate school, or even professorships or research roles, you have to be otherwise qualified. That's what the law says. The ADA says everybody can get reasonable accommodations if there are barriers to access, but you have to be otherwise qualified. And what that basically means is you have to be able to fulfill the application and then program requirements with or without reasonable accommodations. So the first piece of it is that's going to look different for everybody. Just because I'm otherwise qualified certainly does not mean just because I, get my extra time on tests in college or graduate school, or just because I get my quiet office in my work now, doesn't mean I don't have to do work on my own. It's really important that as I'm working, I figure out, I'm going to need new cognitive strategy. For instance, reading when you're a professor, there's a lot of reading to go through. And my short-term memory, because of my brain injury, is not great. So I've realized that I've come with a nice little formula. I basically read text on my computer, and I take some notes. And if I listen to it again and then reread the notes, it's a heck of a lot faster than having to read something 3 times. But it also makes sure that I get all the information that I need.
You're able to synthesize it and process.
That's not a reasonable accommodation any HR office can give me. That's something I had to figure out on my own. And I think being otherwise qualified is going to look different for every single person. Another example, so my work days can be flexible because I teach classes at different times of day, and then I have different meetings. But I kind of picked that in a way that it's gonna work for me. I realized I needed a flexible job, because you have to fit in doctor's appointments and rehab appointments, therapy appointments, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And just because you have extra to do during the day doesn't mean you can't be a professor, right? I do it a little differently. I tend to wake up earlier, and then if I have an appointment or two during the day, I'll work between that, and then I'll work a little bit at night. I spread out my work day so I can make sure my needs are first. And again, I'm otherwise qualified. I'm doing the work. I do have reasonable accommodations. For instance, I'm allowed to record meetings. That just helps my memory. When people give me any kind of duties or responsibilities, I need it in writing. These are not ridiculous things. They're just common sense things, I think. And I think it's important that people are able to ask for them. So yes, I accommodate myself. But on the other side, I also ask for my environment to be accommodating. Hey, if someone says to me in the hall, hey, do you mind doing this real quick? I say, yes, but please put that in an email. And it was scary to have to say that at first, because it felt like I was asking for extra. But then I reminded myself, wait a minute, you preach all educators should use universal design. well, a place of employment should do that too.
Absolutely.
And I think it's so crucial that we ask for what we need and realize it's not unreasonable. And we take our time to figure out what we have to do to support ourselves, as well as how the environment needs to change a little bit to remove barriers.
Wow. As you were sharing, there were so many things that were firing off in my head. I actually was like, I can find a pen. I got a marker.
Yeah, that works.
I was like, listen, she is dropping gems, okay? Dropping gems for us all. Some of the overarching themes, right, that I heard you touch upon. Having that self-awareness, number one, to understand or be able to identify your strengths, as well as areas that you may need additional supports in. That's super important, right? Not just necessarily for academia, but for any field, entering to the workforce. For you to be successful, you have to know what you're good at and some things that you may need supports in. That was one theme that I heard that you touched upon. Another really important point that I wanted to highlight for our viewers and our listeners that you mentioned was being able to self-advocate. So not only being aware of those strengths in areas that we need supports in, but now that you know that you need support, are you asking for it? And are you holding those accountable to which you would need those supports in different environments, right? Whether that's in education, in the education setting, or in the workplace, right? Because they're required by law. You are entitled to this. This is your right. If you self-disclose, you have you go through the process to have the disability recorded on file. This is something that is due to you, right? So I wanted to highlight that as well. So identifying, having self-awareness, being able to identify your strengths and areas of support, as well as being able to advocate on your behalf, right? The last thing that I wanted to emphasize or touch upon is requesting support and assistance as needed. And then having a process in place that works for you. I heard that, the needs that you need or the supports that you need at work may look totally different for someone else. And I love that you gave us some explicit examples, right? Having meetings recorded so that you can go back and listen in or process as needed, right? Being able to jot down certain points and then re-review those points at a later time so that you're able to take your time to synthesize the information and digest it in smaller chunks as needed. All very important, but I think they all are components that are interrelated and would be definitely beneficial for others if they haven't tried or are looking for tips to become successful or achieve that self-determination and success, so to speak. Definitely nuggets of knowledge that you dropped for us. So thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Thank you for sharing. That's the perfect segue, actually, because some of those supports that you mentioned, if we have any middle school, high school, adult age individuals with disabilities that are looking for tools and resources to strengthen some of those skills, right? Problem solving, decision making, self-advocacy. C3 for Me, you can definitely check out C3 for Me. We have supplementary tools, interactive and engaging tools that are definitely non-traditional. We're not going for the boring test-like feeling, right? We want you to be able to explore, strengthen your technical and soft skills while still learning about yourself and planning for your future of success. So definitely wanted to note that. So Emily, you've taken us through, again, this has been very enlightening and inspiring to hear your story, to know more about your journey, and to hear how you are now equipping and empowering others to do the same, right? They can also achieve a life of success, whatever they may envision that to be, because it will be different for everyone.
Sure.
I have two final thoughts or two final questions for you.
Great.
That I definitely would be interested in exploring. The next question that I have for you is, what future goals or aspirations do you have for your success, for yourself, both personally and professionally? So I know there's a lot of different things that you are currently doing, a lot of ongoing exciting projects that are happening behind the scenes and collaborations. But what future goals or aspirations do you have for yourself? What are you next steps? What's cooking?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's all intertwined in my work. And I think my style of both teaching as well as researching is really not just participatory, but also collaborative. Like when I enter a classroom, I don't do the sage and the stage and students sitting in a row. I always put chairs in a circle because we all learn from each other. And same with research. Again, my participants are researchers and my researchers are participants. We all work together. So I think I definitely want to, again, I'm still an early career professional. Just started my career 3 years ago. So as a professor, I mean, so I want to grow in learning about more types of research methodologies that can better
Mhm.
enable that research to practice partnership, as
Yes.
well as learning more about collaborative learning and ways to really enhance that. Because of course, sitting in a circle and not having a discussion leader is one thing, but I really want to learn more about pedagogy and andragogy and how to
Mm.
empower my learners to be able to share their lived experiences, particularly relating to those who have disabilities. I mean, folks always feel like, oh, I have hard knowledge, these facts I know I'm going to share. And that's valuable. But I also want to find new ways to empower learners to say, here's my lived experience. And to realize this is going to enrich the conversation and
Absolutely.
to feel comfortable. Make disability. I want to be an ally who helps disability to be discussed in all kinds of spaces. Because unfortunately, in our country, people still tiptoe around the big D word.
They do.
I
They
look at
do.
it as just a piece of human variation. We all have different hair color and races and genders. We all have different abilities too. So
Absolutely.
I really want to serve as an advocate in neutralizing and normalizing the way we look and think about disability. And I think in learning about new ways to enhance collaborative learning, as well as participatory action research and collaborative research techniques, those are areas I'm really hoping to grow in. I would also like to do. I've done work in phenomenology, learning about people's perceptions of their phenomenon they experience.
Mhm.
And while I do a lot of research about disability communities and disability identity development, I've actually done ethnography or the study of those communities.
Yeah.
I would like to put myself in those communities, whether it be an inclusive post-secondary education program, a transition program, or just a community group of disabled folks. I would
Yeah.
like to continue to immerse myself in those settings and do formal research around that because I think that's going to help the field
There's
grow.
value.
It's certainly going to
Absolutely.
help me expand my abilities as a researcher and practitioner as well.
Absolutely. That would also open up a different lens where we are raising awareness as well as building allies along the way, right? As we get
Yeah,
the information out there, disseminated to those that need it the most and are impacted, and the more you're able to reflect and share their thoughts, their perceptions, their opinions, right? Their
sure.
lived experiences, it makes it all the more inclusive, definitely. So I'm excited to see what's to come with your
Me too.
research and the app and all the accessibility app and all the other great things, contributors that you are adding to society to be more knowledgeable, more aware, more informed about how to get involved and engaged in this type of work, disability advocacy.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it. It's not just about, talking about disability, but it's about empowering people to want to ask questions and empowering
Yes,
those people who have the answers to say, hey, let me tell you what it's like for me to live in this inaccessible world, you know? And I think empowering both sides to have those conversations are how we're going to move forward.
yeah, you are definitely tilting that power imbalance that exists. Definitely, right? Between researchers, between practitioners, and then individuals with disabilities. Yeah, leveraging the playing field. Exciting, exciting. Well, finally, I have one final question for you. Our theme
Ready?
for this special interview series is self determination is my superpower, right? And so I wanted you to share with our viewers and our listeners what a life of self determination and success means to you specifically.
Well, when we think about the formal definition of self determination, it's being able to set goals, self evaluate to see where you are, make a plan, and then have the self efficacy to carry it out. And
Yep.
that's the official definition. But I think what it looked like in my world is being able to say, okay, I want to be an academic one day. I want to create this research. And I'm here. And it's not going to be a couple steps. It's going to be a zigzag. And I'm going to have to, and when I make a little progress, ooh, the path might change a little. So
Mhm.
I think it's
Definitely.
I think for me, self-determination was, yeah, it was about setting goals and creating a path, but making sure I was flexible with myself. Because I also
Mm.
think internalized ableism is huge. In academia, you're supposed to publish and do it fast and work in as many groups as you can and study as many things as you can. Those standards are all established on able-bodied and able-minded norms.
Going
So I
back to
think
the medium, right?
exactly in saying I'm going to be a successful professor, I need to say, hey, well, what does that mean to me? Does it actually mean getting things done fast, or does it mean actually taking my time and
Yes.
not just taking my time, but giving the participants time to really understand the questions I'm asking and find how they want to contribute, how they want to direct the research.
Yeah.
So I think it wasn't just about setting goals and finding ways to meet them, but it was about being flexible with those goals and being flexible with the ways in which I would meet them. And I mean, my progress is still changing. I'm still changing my goals,
Evolving. It's evolving.
exactly. My research projects, always saying, you know what, these are my research questions right now. But as I start, they can change if they need to, because research
Mhm.
shouldn't just be done for the sake of research. It has to be meaningful for both the researcher and especially for the participants in the study. So
Yes.
I think
Yes.
self-determination for me is being able to establish your goals, but not do it in an able-bodied normative way. Say, I want to
Mm.
be a professor, but I want to be a professor on my own terms. I want to be productive and contribute to the field in ways that are meaningful to me. And maybe that doesn't mean, publishing as many articles as I can. Maybe it means publishing a fewer articles that are really meaningful. Maybe instead of attending a million conferences, and a million research conferences, I
Yeah.
make sure I prioritize practitioner conferences where you have more conversations with people. So again, I think it's all about setting your goals and really finding ways to meet them in meaningful ways to both you and the people you work with.
Amazing. Amazing. Doing what works for you, right? Creating
Exactly.
that vision. Of course, you have that goal, but then walking it back to align with your strengths, your interests, your
Mhm.
preferences,
Yep.
your skill set, right? Taking all of that into consideration, which essentially defines person centered planning, right? Essentially, that's what it is. We want to ensure that our goals and what we're doing, that picture or that portrait that we're envisioning meets and satisfies our needs. Um,
Absolutely.
how impactful and empowering is that to have a goal, but be able to redefine that, be flexible enough,
Yes.
right? And open-minded enough, have that growth mindset to be able to evolve over time as that marker may change, as you said,
Mhm.
the end goal may change.
And we may change too along that process. What if we change? Then that means the goal has to change in the way we achieve it.
Yes,
So it's so crucial that we're always listening to ourselves and taking a strengths-based approach to make meaningful goals for us and meaningful ways to achieve them.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, this has been very, very, very enlightening. And I'm sure that I don't want to misspeak, but I am going to speak on behalf of not only myself, but our viewers and our listeners today. This was an amazing, amazing interview. I mean, hearing your personal insights, going through the journey with you, or taking us along the journey with you as to how you have achieved your success in your career as an assistant professor. And then going beyond that with giving us some strategies, some tips, right? Some tools on how we can become allies and advocates of persons with disabilities. Amazing, amazing, very invaluable.
Well,
Well,
it was an absolute pleasure to talk with you.
thanks, Emily. Before we conclude, do you have any questions or any last nuggets that you want to leave our listeners and viewers with today?
I think this podcast is amazing. I'm so happy you're doing it. I really just think people with disabilities for so long have been underestimated and we haven't seen ourselves in positions of power. And it's hard to
Mm,
find role models. Honestly, in high school and college, I couldn't identify one adult who, was in a role that I wanted to pursue who had a brain injury. So I
mm,
really think we need to be out there. We need to form communities. We need to support each other and recognize that the world is still inaccessible in a lot of ways. And for those of us who are, on the path to achieving our goals, we need to make sure that we're sharing, what's working for us with people who are still trying to figure it out because disability community is powerful. And I really think we can all lift each other up.
Amazing. Well, you all heard it first from Dr. Tarconish. That is our call to action to make sure we are educating, informing, advocating, and empowering others, right? As we evolve and we all transition because it's inevitable. So going from middle school to high school to adulthood and beyond across the lifespan. So hopefully C3 for me is creating that safe space where others can share their insights and nuggets with others as to how we are all working together to create a more inclusive and accessible community. Join us for new episodes all month in March, right? Tune in. In celebration of Women's History Month, each week we will be highlighting a neurodiverse female, youth or young adult, with a disability that has overcome and successfully transitioned to adulthood. Tune in to hear from our special guests as they provide insights, share their lived experiences, and life lessons for a successful transition. Thanks again.